mort from an infantesque creature, one tongue requires not only specific materials, but a specific way for those materials to be acquired. Bone of the father, unknowingly given, you will renew your son. Flesh of the servant, willingly sacrificed, you will revive your master. Blood of the enemy, forcibly taken, you will resurrect your foe. Similar to our discussion on weaknesses, an incredibly common magical cost is that of bodily energy, chi, or some other form of arbitrary, or vaguely defined magical power source within the individual. In Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time and Christopher Paolini's Inheritance Cycle, doing something with magic exhausts you. This is fine until you try and be too magically heroic, and you overdose on magical heroin and die. Magic causing fatigue is so common because it is an easy way to delineate the strong from the weak. A powerful magician does not flinch as she vanquishes an army with a single fireball, while a weak one collapses from trying to zap a fly. It also draws on an experience that is easily understood, exhaustion. However, this particular framework has a couple of issues. In stories like The Inheritance Cycle or Dragon Ball Z, it seems overly convenient that the hero only just has enough of the willpower required for magical action, X, when the plot requires them to succeed, and at the same time, the hero only just lacks the willpower or energy needed for magical action, Y, when the plot requires them to fail. This vague requirement of effort is largely unquantifiable, especially if exhausting oneself is the primary limit, and losing bodily energy is the primary cost. The reader will not easily understand the exact cost of, for example, creating a fireball, especially if casting a fireball becomes easier with training, thus costing less energy. The cost here can be largely ignored when the plot requires it. In turn, this weakens any sense of consistency and predictability that is so important in a hard magic system. One of my favorite magical costs is actually from one of the softest fantasy magic systems in G.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series. Beric Dondarrion is brought back to life dozens of times using magic, and it changes him. G.R. Martin describes it as such. My characters who come back from death are worse for wear. In some ways, they are not even the same characters anymore. The body may be moving, but some aspect of the spirit is changed or transformed, and they've lost something. Coming back from the dead costs Beric Dondarrion something of himself. What that is precisely we are never told, but it is visible in his character in the books. Look for unique ways to make your magic cost if you want to distinguish your magic system. Maybe manipulating the element of earth causes plants to die around you. The ramifications of effects like that could be widespread and fascinating to explore. If your magic was common, would it be outlawed to protect the crops and forests? Do you need limitations, weaknesses, and costs? It is understandable to treat articles and books such as this one as checklists in designing a hard magic system. But just because we have discussed the importance of limitations, weaknesses, and costs does not mean that a good hard magic system requires all of them. This is because ultimately, the key to weaving a hard magic system into a story is predictability and consistency, and these two things do not require all of limitations, weaknesses, and costs. In Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series, allomancy is the most prominent magic system. As mentioned, it involves the ingestion of one of 16 different types of metals, each of which give a different power. Alloys are also used in the series, but they must be mixed in specific proportions to be effective. For example, burning a pewter enhancing the physical capabilities of the person who ingested it. They can run at speed for hours, do intense physical labor, and become more athletic. While there are great benefits to this magic, there are not high costs to ingestion or using the ability after having ingested the pewter. It does not make one incapacitated for hours after having used it, it does not rob one of their mental acumen, and it does not shorten their lifespan. Why is this? The reason is that Sanderson crafted allomancy to have strong limitations rather than costs. The reader knows how much more powerful it makes a character, the exact limits of the power. They have a good idea of exactly how much stronger, faster, and enduring they become. There is little ambiguity, and through this he maintains that sense of predictability and consistency. Where the limitations or weaknesses in your hard magic system create strong enough rules for your characters that they establish that sense of predictability and consistency required, it may not be necessary to have a large cost. Likewise, if the cost of your magic is large enough, it may not be necessary to have strict limitations or weaknesses. It really just depends on which kind of rules you want your hard magic system to rely on. One based on making characters more powerful at high risk to themselves due to the weaknesses, one based on carefully calculated decisions of when to use magic due to the cost, or one based on cunning and skill due to the limitations. One fantastic example of a magical cost is Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time series, where male users of the psi in half of the magical one power slowly go insane as they use it. This is not only a high cost to using magic, as it often results in destroying loved ones around you, but it is permanent. Unlike Sanderson's work, Jordan's magic system does not have strong limitations. Theoretically, the Aes Sedai magic users could accomplish virtually anything with few limits on the magic itself. However, its use involves the high cost of insanity and death by exhaustion in the case of a few. In the same fashion, high costs make strong limitations less necessary, as they still regulate how characters can use magic. Style. Picking a style for your magic is always a lot of fun. Typically, hard magic systems need to be more specific about this than soft magic. Maybe you want a theurgical magic system where your characters channel the power of gods, angels, or demons, or they need special magical devices to cast spells, or perhaps a sacrificial system that requires blood and sacrifice, or maybe magic requires tapping into that ubiquitous force that conveniently permeates everything and everyone. I often find writers focus on designing the style of their magic system more than the other parts we have just discussed. While the aesthetics of your magic system are important, it is the predictability and consistency, and the limitations, weaknesses, and costs within those, that will play into the conflicts, problems, and character interactions of your story the most. It is possible that considering those first before your aesthetic will lead to a more cohesive magical framework. Summary. 1. Broadly speaking, a softer magic system means the magic has a vague, undefined, or mysterious set of rules and limitations to being used in the story. A harder magic system, on the other hand, has more clearly defined rules, consequences, and limitations that govern what one can or cannot do with magic. 2. The more a reader comprehends and understands the magic system as an element of the narrative, the more it can be used to solve problems in the story in a satisfying way. The less a reader comprehends and understands the magic system as an element of the narrative, the less it can be used to solve problems in a satisfying way. Hard magic going wrong will be more often due to mistake, misuse, or lack of understanding. 3. One issue with a vague limit of energy requirements or willpower is that because these things are unquantifiable, stories that use them are prone to power creep or inconsistency, with the cost being largely ignored when the plot requires it. In turn, this weakens any sense of consistency and predictability. 4. Where the limitations or weaknesses in your hard magic system create strong enough rules for your characters that they establish that sense of predictability and consistency required, it may not be necessary to have a large cost. Likewise, if the cost of your magic is large enough, it may not be necessary to have strict limitations or weaknesses. 5. While the aesthetics of your magic system are important, it is the predictability and consistency, and the limitations, weaknesses, and costs within those that will play into the conflicts, problems, and character interactions of your story the most. Part 10. Soft Magic Systems. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban by J.A. Rowling, Stranger Things by Ross Duffer and Matt Duffer, The Black Company by Glenn Cook, The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, The Light Fantastic by Terry Pratchett, The A Song of Ice and Fire series by G.R. Martin, The Death Gate Cycle by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, The Lightbringer series by Brent Weeks, Star Wars by George Lucas, The Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. Have you ever read a story where the characters are going about their questy business when they find themselves in a mysterious place steeped in ancient magic, and there are mysterious wizards who do sparkly mysterious magic things, and the magic is never explained? Well, chances are you are reading a story with a soft magic system. While hard magic systems are largely about how you design magic to work, soft magic is more about how it can be worked into a good narrative, and that is we will be discussing in Part X. This can boil down to 6 things: tension, point of view, not directly controlling magic, unpredictability, multiple magic systems, and style. Brandon Sanderson writes stories with very hard magic, but his 3 laws of magic apply to writing stories anywhere on the spectrum from hard and soft. Let us reiterate Sanderson's first law. An author's ability to solve conflict with magic is directly proportional to how well the reader understands said magic. Tension. How well an author can resolve tension is a good test of them as a writer, yourself included. This is where having a soft magic system can make things more difficult, because tension is incredibly difficult to build if your reader has no idea of the capabilities of your characters. But that is the thing about soft magic. The reader is not meant to understand much about the limits, weaknesses, or costs of it in your world. There is nothing wrong this inherently, there are advantages to this framework, but it does provide extra challenges for you as the writer. The reader may not know when your swashbuckling heroes are faced with a real challenge, or whether the wizard can turn around and say, "Fear not, you pathetic mortals, I got this," and magic them away from danger. If you are not careful, using soft magic the reader cannot predict, and they do not understand to resolve tension in the story can just feel to the reader like you are screaming that a wizard did it, and throwing a deus ex machina in their face. Using soft magic to resolve tension. Does this mean an author can never use soft magic to resolve tension? Of course not. Magic systems can be anywhere on the spectrum from hard to soft, and there are plenty of stories that find a balance between the two. The most common way such a magic system is designed is that virtually anything is possible within the soft magic system, but individual characters might only have specific powers with clearer limitations, costs, and weaknesses. J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series is a relatively good example of this. Throughout the books, very few real limitations can be applied to magic as a whole. There could be a spell to accomplish almost anything a wizard might need. Want to kill someone? There is a spell for that. Want to get rid of those pesky muggles? There is a spell for that. Why drink to forget when you can just erase the memories with Obliviate? On top of this, Rowling regularly introduces new spells for things when she needs them, like Expecto Patronum in Harry Potter, and the Prisoner of Azkaban when creating spirit animals made of happiness to fight soul-sucking sadness. Nazgul became important to the plot. This spell, or the others that Rowling introduces throughout the series, do not fit naturally into any pre-established overarching structure to the magic system, giving the sense that anything is possible with the right words, wand movements, and magical thrust behind you. The magic system in the Harry Potter series is relatively soft, with few clear boundaries as to what is theoretically possible. However, the characters themselves, particularly Ron Weasley, Hermione Granger, and Harry Potter, each have very limited magical powers. Though anything is theoretically possible in the magic system, none of these three can just make up a spell on the spot to do whatever they need. Their capabilities are limited to the spells and potions the reader knows they have learned and trained to use throughout the books. The tension is built up, maintained, and resolved satisfactorily, because where magic does solve problems in these stories, the reader understands Harry's capabilities, even if those abilities come from a soft magic system. Readers don't feel cheated because even though a wizard did do it, it does not feel like a wizard did it. It is possible to have harder limitations on the characters without limiting what is possible within the magic system itself, maintaining that sense of mystery and possibility as well as predictability and consistency. It is about striking a balance. 18. Using soft magic to cause tension. Now, while readers may feel cheated if soft magic is used to miraculously resolve tension, it is virtually never a problem if it causes tension. It is a lot easier to have antagonists with vague powers than protagonists, though that does not preclude them from similar problems. This is why we might not understand the powers of the Mind Flayer in Ross and Matt Duffer's Stranger Things, but it still makes for an engaging antagonist. In contrast, we do understand Eleven's powers to an extent because she is a protagonist, and her powers are used to solve problems. We know she has telekinesis and a capacity to project her mind into other dimensions, that these powers are fueled by anger, and that excessive use of them causes her to bleed and faint. What is more important when it comes to using soft magic to cause tension is to be consistent with that antagonist's powers. If your antagonist can disable the mind of another with a thought, then they should use this when it would make sense for them to later on. Likewise, it is just as satisfactory for soft and unexplained magic to create challenges the characters must solve. In other words, feel free to wreak havoc on the lives of your characters with soft magic. Make them sorry they were ever born. Point of view. Whether you want to tell the story from the viewpoint of a magical or a non-magical character may change how you write. Stories with softer magic tend to not be written from the perspective of magic users. For example, Glenn Cook's The Black Company series has a very soft magic system, and there are even main characters who use it regularly, but it is told from the perspective of Croker, a non-magical character. There are a number of reasons for this. 1. If magic exists outside the point of view, you can align the reader with the main character who may view magic as this mystical and unknown force in the world. This works well for a soft magic system, which is inherently mystical and unknown. 2. That sense of the mysterious unknown can be harder to achieve from the perspective of a person who must understand something of your magic. Tolkien's The Hobbit is my favorite example of this, told through the eyes of Bilbo, a non-magical hobbit and handkerchief enthusiast. This perspective reinforces that sense of the unknown in Mirkwood Forest because Bilbo cannot possibly predict what enchantments, spells, or kind of racist elf kings he might face in there. It would be more difficult to create that mysterious tension if the story was told from the perspective of Gandalf the Grey, who would know more about what to expect, being a wizard. But let us say you want to write your soft magic story from the perspective of a wizard. 19. How would you do that? The versatility of the writing medium means there is an infinite number of ways to do so without breaking Sanderson's first and second laws, but we will talk about two that are particularly common and add interesting dynamics to a story. Not controlling magic directly. One way is to write from the perspective of a character who has magic, but they do not control it directly. This trope can be seen all over the place in any King Arthur story where Arthur has the royal magic that allows him to pull the sword out of the stone, or with Rincewind in Terry Pratchett's The Light Fantastic, who has a spell trapped inside his mind that he cannot wield. In G.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series, Daenerys is born with Valyrian magic, which we know has a lot to do with fire and blood, but not much more than that. It is Valyrian magic that allows only Daenerys to bond with dragons and survive standing in a burning funeral pyre at the end of the first book, The 20, but she has no direct control over these powers she is blessed with. These are passive abilities, and these are moments of soft magic. These magical events in her story give us little information as to the limits, weaknesses, or costs of Valyrian magic. While Dany is magical, this magic is not an ability she controls. Martin does not break Sanderson's first law because it is primarily used to make her story more interesting rather than resolve any conflicts in her story. It allows dragons to be logically brought into the story, but it does not magically resolve her problem of Drogon preying on children in Essos. 21. Giving characters little control over their passive magic allows you to keep tension in the narrative because they still have to rely on their intelligence, ingenuity, and skill to solve problems, especially if said magic is unpredictable. In other words, it is not the hero's magical ability to wield the sword of destiny no one else can that allows them to defeat your totally not generic Dark Lord. It is that the hero worked to learn the Dark Lord's weakness and how to wield the sword. Soft magic can facilitate the resolution of your conflict, but not resolve it. That would comes across as a wizard did it. Unpredictability. A second way to write from the viewpoint of a soft magic character is with an element of unpredictability. While hard magic relies heavily on it being predictable and consistent, soft magic is allowed to be a lot more unpredictable. Having your characters themselves be unsure of the limits or capabilities of their magic can be really interesting, and it retains that feeling of mysticism without you needing to explain precisely how it works. The character Melisandre in G.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series is a fantastic example of this. She is one of the few viewpoint characters who actively try to use magic to accomplish things, but not only does the reader not fully understand the limits and rules of her powers, but neither does she entirely. For example, she performs a huge sacrificial ritual for Stannis Baratheon, wholly believing it would transform him into the savior of English grammar and the world, Azor Ahai, but it did not. Sometimes she can call on the Lord of Light for guidance, and other times the same methods just do not work. Other priests of the Lord of Light note that bringing someone back from the dead after an extended period risks unpredictable and dangerous side effects, evidenced in Lady Stoneheart. The rules are not as clear as magical action, X equals magical effect, Y. Even so, the focus of unpredictable magic should not be on its ability to solve problems. Rather, its role in the story should center around its unpredictability, and how that can enrich your story. Soft magic can add fantastical elements to a story in a way that is difficult to do with hard magic, and authors who do this well truly enhance their narratives. Unpredictable magic can often go horribly wrong and create more problems for the characters. H.P. Lovecraft mastered this. Contacting the Old Ones brought ruin and unpredictable boons and curses upon those who contacted them. This brings with it an ancient and engrossing spectacle that hard magic simply cannot bring. In Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman's Death Gate cycle, the more powerful the magic, the more drastic the unpredictable side effects will be. When one character performs necromancy, another random person will die. It can be fascinating to have viewpoint characters using this kind of magic in ways that truly affect the course of the story in not just positive, but negative and neutral ways as well. This is critical because if unpredictable magic is used to solve problems miraculously too often, it can come across as weak writing. Those neutral and negative consequences to magic create a sense of risk and stakes in using it that makes those few times that it succeeds more palatable to the reader. In a story such as this, the principle of consistency needs to be evidenced in the magic's inconsistency. One of my favorite variations of unpredictable magic is from Terry Pratchett's Discworld series, which if you have not read is the perfect balance between fantasy, comedy, and dreadful existentialism. In the series, magic has something of a personality. It is not easy to control, and can simply decide to do things on its own, even when you want it to do something else. Giving magic a sort of sentience can be a really interesting element to explore in your story. Hard magic will go wrong because the practitioners did not understand the rules and limits of the magic, but soft magic is more likely to go wrong simply because of its nature as uncontrollable or unpredictable. It is unlikely to feel like a wizard did it if the reader never loses that feeling of constant looming disaster. How many magic systems should you have? It is relatively common for fantasy stories to have a single magic system like in Brent Week's The Lightbringer series or simply Lucas' Star Wars, but it is possible to include more than one magic system in your story, and there are advantages to doing so. It allows you to have both soft and hard magic systems at the same time. In Patrick Rothfuss' The Kingkiller Chronicles, there is sympathy, which is a harder magic system, but there is also naming and fey magic, which is far softer. In the A Song of Ice and Fire series, there is an all-you-can magic buffet with the Faceless Men, the Old Gods, the Lord of Light, the Others, Children of the Forest, and Valyrian magic. 22 Few of them have much to do with one another, and they are a mix of harder and softer magic. Systems. You can write a story with both, and which style is best is simply up to what fits for your narrative. If you really want to distinguish your novel, you might want to use multiple magic systems. I have often felt that this is a missed opportunity that has not been adequately explored yet. Having multiple can add to the mysteriousness of your world, while having one may help establish that sense of predictability and consistency required for hard magic. Style. Soft magic systems have the advantage of being extremely versatile and flexible because the aesthetic is far more important than predictability and consistency a lot of the time. Perhaps you might go for ritualistic magic, spell magic, theurgical magic that calls on demons and angels, or ley lines that create wells of magical energy across the world, or any combination, or even all of these at once. Hard magic systems typically rely on one or a few styles at most. For clear and consistent rules, they usually need to be restricted. In contrast, having a wide variety of aesthetics can give a changeability and grandeur to your magic system, relying more on inspiring wonder, horror, and or than establishing predictability and rules. As Sanderson writes in his essay, The First Law of Magic, soft magic preserve the sense of wonder in their books, to give the setting a fantastical feel. To indicate that men are a small part of the eternal and mystical workings of the universe. Summary. 1. A major challenge with soft magic is that tension is incredibly difficult to build if your reader has no idea of the capabilities of your characters. A common way to get around this is to have a very soft magic system overall with few limitations, but the individual characters might only have specific powers with clearer limitations, costs, and weaknesses. 2. A soft magic system is virtually never a problem if it causes tension. It is a lot easier to have antagonists with vague powers than protagonists. What is more important when it comes to using soft magic to cause tension is to be consistent with that antagonist's powers. 3. If magic exists outside the point of view character, you can align the reader with them to view magic as this mystical and unknown force in the world. This works well for a soft magic system, which is inherently mystical and unknown. That sense of the mysterious unknown can be harder to achieve from the perspective of a character who must understand something of your magic. 4. Giving characters little control over their passive magic allows you to keep tension in the narrative because they still have to rely on their intelligence, ingenuity, and skill to solve problems, especially if said magic is unpredictable. Soft magic can frame the tension, but not resolve it. It is often used to make stories more interesting. 5. Writing from the point of view of a soft magic user can be made easier with an unpredictable magic system, making them unsure of the limits, consequences, or capabilities. This helps retain that feeling of mysticism without you needing to explain precisely how it works. 6. However, it will be stronger writing if unpredictable magic affects the course of the story in not just positive, but negative and neutral ways as well. Those neutral and negative consequences to magic create a sense of risk and stakes in using it that makes those few times that it succeeds more palatable to the reader. 7. Having multiple magic systems allows your magic to be more versatile, diverse, and allows for both hard and soft systems. A major advantage to soft magic is that you are not limited to a few styles like hard magic. Aesthetics are more important with a soft magic system. Part 11. Magic Systems and Storytelling. Avatar, The Last Airbender, and The Legend of Korra by Michael D. Martino and Brian Konietzko. So you have a magic system with meticulous limits where only gay wizards can shoot lightning bolts, as well as it having an air of mysteriousness and possibility, so nobody knows when a demon will eat characters without plot armor. That is fantastic, but what comes next? Having an interesting magic system is not just about how nuanced your rules are, or how much of a spectacle it can be. Fireworks and fireballs are great, but they can feel hollow unless your magic system is integrated into the story in a meaningful way. As a case study, we will look at how one magic system is integrated into its story in Avatar, The Last Airbender, and the sequel series The Legend of Korra. We will discuss where DiMartino and Konietzko did it well, and a couple of times where they didn't. 23 For those of you who have never watched Avatar, which, given you bought this book, is extremely unlikely, I am unsure whether I should A. imprison you and pin your eyes open, forcing you to watch all 61 episodes, or B to exile you to the uncivilized lands where good storytelling does not grace you. However, as a kind overlord, and for the pretenses of this book, I should give those few plebeians amongst you a rundown. In the series, bending gives a person the ability to manipulate one of the 4 Greek elements, air, water, earth, or fire. They do this primarily with what essentially amounts to martial arts. Now, integrating magic into your story is where Sanderson's third law of magic shows up, and it is where the Avatar series excels. Expand on what you already have before you add something new. Sanderson's focus was on how a story that explores a single magical concept in depth will be more interesting than one that explores numerous magical concepts shallowly. For our purposes of exploring in depth, this idea can be broken down into 3 areas. 1. How the author weaves their magic system into their world building. 2. How the author weaves their magic system into their narrative. 3. How the author weaves their magic system into the arcs of their characters. Magic systems and world building. Suspension of belief is crucial to immersing a reader in your story, and world building is an important part of that. This is about writing things into the story that may not be the focus of the narrative, but help to place your reader in a world that feels thought through. For example, if your magic system relies on you killing orphans and using their souls, then how does society run its orphanages? 24 These are not simply questions for an author to play with as interesting riddles, or thought experiments for the reader to ponder. These are basic questions that underpin the realism of your world. We draw on relatable elements of our human world and history to ground it in realism, but it is these differences that naturally arise that make a story not simply fantastical, but enticing. Part of the reason that bending is such a fantastic magic system is because of how well grounded it is in its world. From philosophy to religion to geography to warfare to culture, bending alters the role of each of these things. Airbending utilizes Bagwazhang, a martial art that focuses on evasion rather than attacking, which pairs perfectly with the philosophy of the air nomads. The air nomads detached themselves from worldly concerns and found peace and freedom. The massive walls of Ba Sing Se, longer than the Great Wall of China, thicker than the Hoover Dam, and higher than the Eiffel Tower, feel like a natural consequence of being able to manipulate Earth. Earth-based defensive fortifications would be a hallmark of a culture that revolves around earthbending, able to be repaired instantly, and changed to face different enemies. In The Legend of Korra, lightning benders are employed to generate power. We see benders being employed to make mineral refining more efficient. One of the more interesting world-building details was having firebending thrust the Fire Nation into an industrial revolution with steam engines, tanks, and airships. This naturally arises from their widespread ability to manipulate heat, a capacity that makes steam power a lot easier, and their island being ore-rich, as it is based around a chain of volcanoes. If a reader is questioning why the characters have not used the magic system to do X, then people within the world of your story would have done so too. Coming up with satisfying answers as to why they have not is markedly difficult at times, so it can be easier to simply allow it to feature in the story. None of the aforementioned details are at the forefront of the story, but their inclusion demonstrates how the writers considered the ramifications of bending for the world in detail. Magic feels more like an integral part of the world, rather than just a gimmick ability that the characters use to solve problems. It truly feels like you could not take bending out of the world without radically shifting these other elements of society and history. But world building is not a one-way street. It is an easy trap to fall into to take a medieval Europe-esque society and see how the magic system would change its norms of the feudalism, the noble and peasant classes, the role of the church, the tropes that make up medieval Europe-esque fantasy. However, it is not merely about how magic systems change what a writer might assume is the standard of society or the norm. Culture is more like a complex 6-laned, 5-way intersection with pedestrian crossings and a chicken crossing the road. It is about how your world impacts the role of magic itself. If your fantasy culture has strong beliefs about gender roles, are women allowed to use certain kinds of magic? This is precisely what happened in the Northern Water Tribe in Avatar. Katara is not